Net neutrality is under siege in the United States. What will happen if this basic consumer protection is lost, and will it affect gamers outside of the US? Let's chat about it in the comments below, but first, my opinion. I'm Tarmack, and this is Feature Creep. I really enjoy doing these little semi-political pieces because I find that a lot of gamers often don't understand the reach that some of these sorts of broad changes can have on the industry we all know and love, and I like doing what I can to educate where possible. I say semi-political because I'm willing to stake a claim that net neutrality is a clear example of something that has no business being a political issue that was turned into one due primarily to some heavy players in the corporate scene lobbying against it. So first off, what is net neutrality? It's a very simple statement that requires some level of enforcement in order to keep companies from overstepping their bounds. The statement is that all data is equal. If I send you an email, it gets precisely the same amount of priority in the series of tubes that is the internet as your Netflix connection. My internet browsing needs to be as important as your multiplayer game of COD or whatever else. Net neutrality is the concept that regardless of the source or recipient of a packet of data online, the companies that manage that data, the internet service providers, cannot discriminate between different types of data and are not allowed to prioritize one type over another. To abuse the basic semantics of the name net neutrality itself, the internet is to be a neutral party, blindly throwing data from source to recipient without putting any filters or obstacles in the way. Why is net neutrality a topic of discussion right now? The Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, in the United States, through current chairman Ajit Pai, has stated that a change as recent as 2 years ago is going to be repealed, taking the FCC view of the internet back to an older way of thinking with a repeal of the Title II status of internet service providers. Yes, this is a US-only regulatory body, but don't worry, I'll get to how this can affect gamers outside of the US a bit later in the video. Suffice to say that you're not immune if you're outside of the borders of the United States. Title II is a category in US infrastructure that utilities fall under, whether phone, power, etc. It's basically a method of forcing an even playing field between various utilities, as they're all deemed effectively a basic right by the government in the US to all who would use them, and as a result, we can't have anti-competitive practices between those various utilities. For example, the Title II change for ISPs is what forced the current ISPs in the States to provide Google Fiber access to their infrastructure to install fiber connections into the existing pipes and onto poles. They get to charge for the service, but it can't be unreasonable and they can't just say no. On its face, this is the first of many issues that affect gamers, though primarily in the States. Internet is the bread and butter of gaming now, and it has been for some time. Higher bandwidth, lower latency gaming is important, with proper fiber being the best that we can do. And with ISPs having the ability to cordon off sections of the internet at will, all of you gamers out there who are concerned with having the best performance possible will remain stuck with the pseudo-monopoly that has been in place for quite some time now, with not much of a chance for any new entrants into the market. This issue is a bit outside of gaming, but is often considered one of the core problems with not having strong net neutrality rules. And if the internet service in the States remains as crippled as it is right now compared to the rest of the world, games will be hobbled as a result, for as long as the ISPs deem it necessary to not provide proper internet plans to one of the largest gaming markets on the planet. But what extends beyond the basic ISP competition problem with net neutrality going away is much, much more nefarious. It's called traffic shaping, or the process of prioritizing certain types of internet traffic over others. You might hear the terms fast and slow lanes used to describe this as well, though I find those to be disingenuous. Let's say that I'm AT&T. I run a very large internet service provider, and I notice that a lot of people are using Netflix all of the time. Enough use, in fact, to potentially degrade the level of service on my network, or at least to require me to upgrade my network in order to keep up. I approach Netflix and I say, I'm going to deprioritize data sent from you guys to your customers because it's degrading my network. From a first look perspective, this sounds kind of reasonable, right? I've identified someone who's harming the service for everyone else, and I throttle it accordingly. The problem comes in two places, however. The first is when, instead of throttling the content, I make an offer to Netflix that they can pay me a fee to keep their service unthrottled. I can then use that additional revenue to upgrade my network to match the demand, or in the case of a blatant monopoly, I can just post higher profits and let it all burn. Or even worse, the network was fine the whole time and Netflix wasn't actually in a position to degrade the internet user experience. And the second problem is when I happen to run my own service that competes with Netflix. So I charge Netflix to remain on the normal traffic priority, while my own service gets free reign just because I happen to own the pipe that it sends data through. It starts to sound awfully mafia-esque in nature when it's put that way, doesn't it? Almost like a protection fee to keep your little corner store from being burned to the ground in ye olde Italy. You as a business essentially have to choose between normal service and degraded service. Now, you'll often hear the rhetoric change to the concept of fast and slow lanes like I mentioned, where the people supporting the removal of net neutrality say that there will be no fast lanes. And they're probably right. There won't be some new higher tier of speed and priority added, no fast lane. Rather, there will be current lanes and slower lanes. And of course, these large companies have no choice. If Netflix doesn't pay the protection fee, then their users experience large buffering issues getting their movies and shows. That degraded experience will push users to the AT&T official channel that conveniently doesn't experience the same buffering issues. It's a lose-lose situation for them. They pay or they lose customers because ultimately they're at the mercy of the ISP who controls just how much priority their data has in being sent from one place to another. You might be saying, geez, why is he talking about Netflix so much? I thought he said this affected gamers. Well, my dear friends, what exactly makes Netflix different than Microsoft, Sony, Valve, and any other game-related company that transmits a large amount of data? Frankly, they're very similar, except that gaming has the added exception that latency actually matters to gamers as well, unlike Netflix viewers. You can easily watch a movie with a ping over 1,000 milliseconds because really, as long as the data stream is continuous at an acceptable speed, the viewer will never notice the latency. But you'd never want to play a game online that way, where the interaction between the player and the game would be noticeable to the point of unplayable. The chance that end users will ever outright notice a degradation in services is very low from the major players in the market. Microsoft isn't about to let an ISP actually slow down traffic to the Xbox Live network. Valve will never actually allow their downloads to be slowed down because the ISP demanded money of them. They'll pay the money. This is the core business and they won't put that in jeopardy. What will happen, however, is that over time, everything will get more expensive in order to pay for the protection fee all of our favorite services now have to cough up just to keep the current level of traffic priority. So if users won't notice degraded services, well, who cares, right? We still get fast data received from all of our favorite company services. If Sony has to pay a significant fee in order to keep their abysmally slow download speeds from being slowed down even further, they're going to pay that fee. And then they're going to keep a larger cut of video game sales or increase the price of PlayStation Plus. They may insist on games increasing the amount of microtransactions and other nonsense that goes along with it. They may alter their publishing decisions to ensure higher profit games at the expense of quality. They might publish fewer titles that are risky because ultimately the ISP has taken a chunk of revenue from them in exchange for exactly the same service Sony was getting under the previous system. That protection fee they pay won't get them anything new. Bah, say the detractors, this net neutrality rule has only been in place for a few years. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. A thought parroted by totally average Joe internet user Mark Cuban when the new rules were on the table to solidify net neutrality in the first place. This wasn't a problem before and won't be a problem now, at least that's what they claim. In fact, to quote Ajit Pai's FCC media release, quote, "Did the fast lanes and slow lanes exist? No," end quote. And he's right, they didn't. But, for example, Netflix was paying a protection fee to keep their traffic from getting throttled. In 2014, Netflix paid interconnect fees to Comcast, Time Warner, Verizon, and AT&T to speed up its internet traffic. Also, back in May 2014, Netflix increased its subscription fee from $7.99 to $8.99 a month. Want to bet on whether this price increase had anything to do with the interconnect fees that they had to start paying? The thing about net neutrality that is often not discussed is that the services you use all the time, the big popular ones, are never going to slow down. They have the money to pay the extortion racket and keep their service at the current level. That service will get more expensive as they pass those fees on to their own users, or, say, make sure they start to include ads in things that didn't previously have ads to try and make up the shortfall. The idea of fast and slow lanes is merely the threat that your content, your data as someone who provides a service, could be throttled if you don't pony up some cash by way of an agreement between yourself and the internet service provider. Another way that net neutrality will affect gamers is through the use of data caps. Numerous countries operate with data caps on internet service provider plans, and the removal of the concept that all data should be equal allows these ISPs to exclude certain data sources from counting against your home data cap. Thus, if you're a company who wants people to use your high data service, such as a gamer who downloads 50GB game installs but only has a plan capable of doing this once or twice a month, that person might choose a service that is excluded from the data cap. This is another part of the protection fee in action, where Microsoft, Sony, Valve, Nintendo could be subject to a fee to be part of that ecosystem. Just imagine the poor folks in the States getting sold a gamer internet package. Download all of your games without counting against your data cap, plus our new ultra revolutionary mega low latency boost mode. Only another $10 a month. The small guys, game developers and publishers not large enough to pay those fees, yeah, they could wind up with the short end of the stick. How great is it for competition if the small companies don't have the money to pay those interconnect fees to ensure that they're not being throttled? How many will be able to get in on being data cap exempt? Well, there was a solid group of 800 startups, including companies like Imager and GitHub, who wrote a very strong letter exactly to that effect to the FCC. This rule change is extremely damaging to small startup companies. Quote, incumbents who provide access to the internet would be able to pick winners or losers in the market. They could impede traffic from our services in order to favor their own services or established competitors. Or they could impose new tolls on us, inhibiting consumer choice. End quote. And game companies are no exception. All of these things are why net neutrality is important. In Canada, we recently got a very positive ruling on net neutrality from the CRTC, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. Hell, they even popped onto Reddit to thank people for their input into the ruling. In the view of the CRTC, differential pricing, or the idea that companies cannot zero-rate data, excluding it from data plans, or discount retail internet data traffic, is simply against the rules. A huge win, not just for the end consumers in Canada, but also small businesses who can't pay these protection fees to ensure that they're treated the same, if protection fees are even provided to them as an option. Sometimes it's just an ISP providing a fast lane, data-exempt service themselves, and nobody else can really compete with it. But I did say at the start of all this that it doesn't just affect United States gamers. So let's talk about that really quick. There are two primary issues that can and will affect gamers in a much more global sense. The first is the idea of traffic traveling through the United States. Not every packet of data hits a US interconnect. That is very true, but a lot of them do. Many of the companies that you use to get your games from or play on servers with are based in the United States. It's reasonably elementary to determine what kind of traffic data is from, and it's entirely plausible that the data you're accessing will be caught in that net. I've heard such nonsense being suggested that companies will just move their infrastructure out of the States if this happens, which betrays a rather stark misunderstanding of how cheap it is to move a live data center. The second issue, and the one that I'm most concerned with, is the idea of increased cost. It's pretty rare for an industry to lower costs once they've been raised. You don't tend to go backwards in consumer benefit. So, given that the US is such a large part of the worldwide gaming market, increased costs of development will be passed down to the end customer. After all, so many people over the years have told me that gaming is getting unsustainably expensive. Whether it's more focus on microtransactions, more season passes, more early access, more Kickstarters from big publishers, higher costs of subscriptions, or even the big one, a concerted effort on the part of the AAA publishing scene to finally market a shift to a new $70 US-based price for video games, we are going to see an increase simply due to the passing through of costs. Because really, they're expensive to make, and we already have armies of gamers online defending how expensive they are and how we should already be paying more than we do. Make no mistake, the US is one of the largest producers, period, and none of these companies are going to eat the profit deficit that they just had to pay out to Comcast or other companies to be part of the gaming tier to ensure data isn't throttled or doesn't count against user caps. They're not going to just absorb that cost. It's going to be filtered down to the customer, and that part sure as hell isn't going to stop at the US border. No, if the costs go up in the States, it's gamers that will be paying for those increased costs. Mark my words, if game development or publishing costs go up because of net neutrality repeal, so do yours. Net neutrality is an important concept, and as much as everyone should know this by now, frankly, I think it's the name that's a huge part of the problem. Given society's current bent towards human rights, I think that a much better name would have been data equality. So let's talk about data equality in the comments below. Feature Creep is kind of my signature series, and I run it with no YouTube ads, courtesy of the people who support the channel on Patreon. It's always great to chat with people about more serious game-related topics from time to time, or perhaps most of the time. So there's a link in the description to my Discord chat channel, which usually devolves into meta discussions on game economies, industry shenanigans, and other things befitting a less meme-centric mind. Thanks for watching. That's all I have to say. Tarmack out.